Welcome. Welcome to Insights of Questrom and our exciting discussion today. Generative AI Perspectives, 1 year-ish since the launch of ChatGPT. I'm Pete Howard, professor of the practice and executive director of the Digital Business Institute here at the Questrom School of Business. Really excited to bring together our panel today for a lively interactive discussion on this important topic. Okay, so with me today are two experts in the field of AI, who also happen to be our inaugural fellows in the new Generative AI initiative of our Digital Business Institute. DK Lee, Kelly Questrom Associate Professor in Management Information Systems and our Digital Business Institute Fellow. Welcome, DK. And Gordon Birch, Kelly Questrom Associate Professor of Information Systems, also a Digital Business Institute Fellow. Hello. So welcome. So let's go. As most of you know, ChatGPT is a large language model-based chatbot developed by OpenAI and launched on November 30th, 2022. It enables users to refine and steer a conversation towards a desired length, format, style, level of detail, and language. It's almost a year since the launch, and the launch has really accelerated advancements and developments and excitement, frankly, in the field of AI, artificial intelligence. So DK, Gordon, what do you think are some of the most significant changes you've seen in the past 11 to 12 months?
I'll go first. I think obviously performance of the models has been improving pretty rapidly, sort of a breakneck pace, which has this interesting side effect that it's pretty hard to predict what it's going to be like 1 year from now. I think none of us really would have expected them to be as good as they are at this point, or well, maybe DK is an exception because I think he's been tracking it a bit longer, but I think the quality of the models has been improving a lot, and it's sort of scale of the models and the amount of data that they're ingesting to do this is sort of nonlinear order of magnitude increases from one model to the next. We've seen huge influx of new competition and new teams releasing new models. And I think a lot of what's happening that's really sort of most interesting of late are sort of recent movement towards multimodal models. It's sort of like we're moving from the ability to write and speak, and we're now adding vision and voice and potentially audio, which I think there's a huge amount of potential and sort of explosion in possible applications that are about to happen that we haven't even conceived of yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so several fronts. First thing is, if you remember back in March of this year, there was a supposedly leaked document from internal Google saying that we have no moat. But as time goes, we see that OpenAI, Google, Meta, they have all the moat because the open source community, you can see a lot of it, it's very vibrant. Happening, lots of models coming up on Hugging Face. GitHub is going crazy, but and there are a lot of models that are like smaller, like 7 billion or like say double-digit billion parameters that are beating a bunch of different benchmarks, but it's very specialized, right? And in the end, a lot of them are just marginally better than GPT-4 or the cutting-edge models, and the fact is that the regular people and the non-big tech companies do not have access to computing power to run 100 billion or trillion parameter models. If you see a lot of the research papers that are coming out that show emergent behavior of large language models, like some particular reasoning abilities, although that's also not there yet, or some whatever the emergent behavior is, it's all concentrated on like triple billion digit parameter models that we have no access to. A lot of the papers actually show that these models, some cool things happening or cool behavior has been detected in a model. It's almost always like the large language models. Yes.
When you say cool behavior, do you mean some indication of cognition?
Indeed, yeah, and it could be a variety of different things. Certain aspects of reasoning ability, although it's not, it's very, one aspect of reasoning, or it has some cognition behavior. It shows, all these different types. Or it does beat some, there are lots of benchmarks, for example, common sense reasoning or mathematical problem solving, these kind of things. And a lot of them, if you look at the paper details, all the graph goes like, you have many of them just like flattening out, and they are all like 7 billion, double-digit billion. And then you have one that's like going like this, which is the triple-digit billion parameter models. And that's been happening. So I think it's getting more concentrated. The power is getting more concentrated. Another thing on the VC sides and the startup side, people are finding out is all these wrapper that they call it the wrapper companies, where they use the ChatGPT APIs and then do some packaging around it and sell it. A lot of them are giving up because once OpenAI or Meta or Google updates the model, it's just better than their wrapper, and it's just a matter of time that it gets replaced. So it's still unclear. I mean, of course, there will be like a killer, companies and unicorns coming out, but it's just like the early .com ages where a lot of them will just be, rise and fall, and it's probably really hard to tell which ones will survive. So, and I could talk more, but
That's fascinating. We just follow up with a couple of things. So we heard, a multimodal, what they want to get back to, with the, vision models, images, as well as text and everything else. But in terms of your moat concept, and it almost sounds like you're seeing a concentration of power, much like in e-commerce with Amazon. I mean, do you really see that happening?
I mean, that's what's happening right now, right? Like Amazon just invested so much money, billions of dollars in Anthropic. I think other companies are trying to follow. So they have this OpenAI, Anthropic, and other companies, and it's all concentrating. Even the big companies are concentrating to these, right? And out of that, I think right now, surprisingly, like Meta has been killing it with the open source movement, and even the open source movement the world is confused, right? So you have literature on open source, right? Now, with the benefits like open sourcing in a traditional software, where there are benefits of network effect, marketing effect, all kinds of different things. But in generative AI, it's not clear because the mode is actually fine-tuning things, right? Your data, injecting expertise, making your own. But once the weights are shared, it's out there. But Meta has been doing that, but they're leaving marks all over, right? Everybody uses Llama 2 to build their open source model, right? I think so you have like OpenAI going from open to closed AI, right? You have Stability AI that's been open all the time and getting sued left and right. Right there, the Stable Diffusion company, they released large language models as well. Then you have like Midjourney, the text-to-image model company that has been killing it while being closed all the time, right? And then you also have close to open, like Google has been closed, but then now they're opening up more. So it's like all companies are confused on what to do. It's unclear what the strategy is.
Yeah, well, on the open source point, I mean, certainly you hear a lot about people using the Llama 2 model in the open source, developing privately deployed, fit for purpose models. But if they're not as powerful, will that last? Sounds like you don't think it will. Gordon?
Well, I mean, yeah, part of the question as to why they're following this open source strategy is what do they get from doing that? And I think part of it may be tied to this notion of legal risk, actually, because Midjourney and OpenAI and others have been getting a ton of lawsuits also, right? There's a lot of questions about data provenance and sort of what rights do they have access to, and they've been taking advantage of these things. And so there's a lot of legal threat that comes from these models in the closed source. But with the open source models, they're kind of putting it out there and other people pick it up and use it and maybe subject themselves to lawsuits. And so it gives you possibly some freedom to kind of wait and see what happens until things shake out a little bit. So that might be part of the calculus of what's going on. They're also kind of allowing partnerships with sort of open source community to help advance their models. And this question of like, if everything is dependent on hardware, as it seems to be at the moment. I mean, we just had rumors of OpenAI. They give out investing in chips now, which kind of speaks to that a little bit.
They hired Joni Ives, right? Or the Apple designer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So then, that calls into question whether sort of on a practical side, if the models are going to be able to keep up in the long run, it's certainly not clear.
Or they have an eyes on an Uber device for this, right? His design skills.
That'd be cool.
Great. So a lot of questions about the business model, open source versus large scale, concentration power in the bigs, PBD. Getting back to the multimodal question, Gordon and DK, what do you see happening there? I mean, it does seem like there's lots of different solutions out there for different types of applications. Will there be some convergence into multimodal, or will it be sort of best in breed, integrate, as you wish?
Wait, what do you mean convergence?
Well, convergence, will there be one platform that does it all, or?
I think you'll get both. I think it's already happening now, right? So you have these general purpose models that are broad application. They really benefit from having huge numbers of parameters and tons of data. And then you have specialized models that are sort of purpose specific, industry specific, or trained on like a company's own data. There's benefits that come from that. So the same thing is likely to play out. It's going to depend on the application. You're going to have sort of a probably fractured marketplace that's comprised of both and how you're going to use it. And I think kind of what you're seeing is, I don't know, it's like there's limits on what you can do with a model that's constrained to text, right? Like the places where you can use that are very much constrained. And so as you add more media, right, more senses, in some sense, you think about this movement towards embodied AI, you're giving the model access to new sources of input and output. And that kind of explodes the number of possibilities of what it can do. So I think it's only natural that we're going to go that way. But again, it's going to be purpose specific where you would deploy these things.
You use the term embodied AI. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the embodied AI is it's basically, I think, movement towards like AGI, right? So the underlying hypothesis is that these AI, which just learns on text, or it's not actually interacting with the world, that's a big barrier, right? Like humans have evolved organically to interact with the surrounding world. The surrounding world gives us a stimulus or stimuli, and our neurons fire in a certain way. We recognize that there's a danger, and then we use our sensory and motor skills to either fight the danger or escape from the danger, right? So that's actually physical grounding that's built in, right? That gives us a goal, an objective that's now very different. So the embodied AI, basically, they're saying, well, we should add the sensory motors ability to AI to even develop further. So get towards AGI, artificial general intelligence.
Right.
And I think multimodal LLMs are a step towards that. And then, but it still needs to have that, grounding to the, yes. And I think going back to the convergence question, it's just, I don't, there's so many models just popping up left and right. We work with in our team, we work with a bunch of multimodal LLMs, and then we have some results, and then like a new one comes in, just beat, a bunch of different benchmarks. So it's just popping up left and right. There isn't this will probably go on for a while.
So early days in terms of really fleshing out is it correct to say fleshing out the usable applications or the scalable applications?
What? So what
yeah, I mean, this will go on for a while. I'm following up on that comment in that, what will go on for a while? Figuring out how to best use the models, figuring out how to use the multimodal applications. For example, I work with people that think or would like to see, a large language model scan a bunch of company data and create a beautiful PowerPoint deck that can be presented to a customer. Well, many steps to that, right? I mean, including images and including graphs and charts, and it's not just one model to do that, right? I mean, are we at all close to a world where that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, technology, if you fine tune and engineer it, yeah. But it is able to produce whatever you want it to produce. But in the end, there's always have to be human feedback to sort of tell, this is cool looking, this is good, this is not good. So that's right now a lot of the cost, other than fine tuning large models, parameters, updating, processing lots of data.
So let's pivot to the role of the humans in this. Human interaction, iterative learning from humans, training, all that. Gordon, what do you see as the current and ongoing need / role for the human in the equation?
I mean, I guess it's two or threefold depending on how you think about it. So one, humans are providing all the data in the first place right now. There's a component here about RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. Basically, is we can talk about both of these separately because I think they're a little distinct but interconnected. So the RLHF is the human feedback to help calibrate the model. Basically, historically, you might think about trying to manually code like an objective function or a loss function or like an error function. So the model would try to minimize that error, and that's how it would learn to do better. It's hard to come up with like a well-codified, formally specified function that defines this is what a human would say. Right? I mean, you could try to do that, but that's extremely challenging. So RLHF, the idea is, well, we won't even try. We will just drop a person in there, and it will serve as the objective function by giving like yes or no. This was good. This was not good. And we'll try to minimize people saying it's wrong. It's kind of the idea. Scalability is a challenge. It's extremely expensive to rely on like dedicated evaluators to serve in a function. Of course, that's what OpenAI notoriously did with its models, and it's a component. Users also play that role to some degree. So when you're making use of the tool, you can give positive and negative feedback on responses and things, and you can kind of leverage that signal to help improve the performance of the model a bit. So that's part of it, and scalability is a question. And then, of course, the data itself that's being used to train the models, I mean, up to this point, as I mentioned earlier, we've had issues with lawsuits and data provenance, really sort of trolling the whole web to find as much human-generated text as you can, in the case of LLMs, and using that to train sort of forward prediction, like next sentence, next word prediction. That's only scalable to a point because obviously we have legal issues rising now. Number two is what happens when you run out of crawlable data you train these things with. Data's got to come from somewhere. Actually, we can talk about it a bit later, but we have some recent research where we're starting to look at that. And there's sort of a byproduct of these tools being available is that people are now producing less text on the internet because they're not going and asking each other questions and posting answers. They're just talking to the tool. So there's sort of it's undermining itself in some sense in terms of the feedback loop. So yeah, there's definitely a role for humans, but in the long run, it's not totally clear how that dynamic's going to persist and be sustainable.
Interesting. So speaking of research, in terms
there's a question over there.
I'm sorry.
I find what you just said fascinating. Hadn't really thought about the impact of this on fresh new material being added to the resource, right? So do you have a sense of scale with that statement?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll jump the gun a bit and talk about some research we've been doing actually together on this topic. So there's a general question of like people are using large language models in particular quite heavily, often in the workplace, whether their employer wants them to or not, because it's hard to regulate, because people will bust out their phone, right? We can talk about risks that come from that as well. But the point is, who would they have talked to or what would they have done if they hadn't had that tool?
Right.
Quite often they would have talked to somebody else. Right? If I have a question, I don't know the answer, I want to do, I'm a new employee and I want to figure out how I should do this task, I would go talk to a person. Now I don't necessarily need to do that as much and I use the tool instead, right? Which has, I think, with really, really vast implications that people haven't really understood yet. And so we kind of study this question, like how likely is this to happen and where is this likely to happen and how big is the effect to your original question. And so we don't have data from private companies, unfortunately, at the moment, where we could study this, which would be ideal. Like to anybody in the room or online, if you have data, let me know. But what we do have is public communities online, where people do typically go to ask each other questions, answer questions, and solve problems. And so we look at this question in the context of Stack Overflow, which is the world's largest online developer community, where people go and ask coding questions, right? And then we also look at Reddit development forums. And we estimate the effect of when ChatGPT came out, it's sort of this really rapid shock on the world, right? Because it's sort of at the time was the most rapidly adopted tool in history. Now Threads beat it, but they kind of cheated by piggybacking on Instagram and it's dying now. So anyway, it's not a good counterpoint, but it rapidly adopted by tons of people, especially in the developer community. And so we can look at, number one, the drop off in web traffic to Stack Overflow, which was quite sudden. There was something like a 15% estimated drop in web traffic to Stack Overflow, which is about 1 million people a day. And then the amount of content being posted has fallen by a similar proportion. And it's heterogeneous across topics. So it's much more heavily concentrated on topics where there was more training data available to train ChatGPT, where it performs better. And we see that in the data. And then sort of the bad part, of course, I mean, all this, you could think of this as bad generally. Not necessarily, because maybe I'm getting sort of more efficient answers and things with this tool. But the problem is that if I'm not connecting with other people, that's bad, like I said, for connecting with other people in the organization and onboarding, for career advancement, all these things that are going to maybe go away when I'm not connecting with other people anymore. It's generally bad, right? And it seems like a really large...
It's a fresh perspectives. You're just regurgitating what's already there.
Yeah, exactly. So people are ceasing, they're not asking as many questions, content is falling. And now what do we train on in the future? Now we have to start relying on the one-on-one interactions with users. And that's not clear how well that's going to go. Or maybe we start thinking about synthetic data. Not clear how well that's going to go. So it's like a big unknown, actually.
And also the incentive is all out of whack, right? So in response to the large language models being able to absorb IP, whether those are writings or pictures. So we see artists, writers, like protesting or, preventing, suing. So it does have an impact on supply. So, but this problem of like different equilibria caused by the algorithm in a system, whether it's society or platform, website has existed for as long as, internet was there and people are using algorithms like recommender systems, right?
Yeah.
So then you could sort of think about, all these tools that basically, create advertisement on the fly. They have been doing that. For example, Netflix, what you see, the snippets and the pictures personalized to you. And then advertisement could be personalized to you based on certain e-commerce platforms have been doing that. And you can see maybe like a sort of dystopian situation where computers are generating things on the fly and you're using filtering algorithm. So it's like AI versus AI, just doing lots of wasting, right? Creating filtering, even without the human in the loop at any point based on certain aggregate data. And so there have been lots of unintended consequences, even simple things like collaborative filter, which is recommender system. For example, the punchline there, and I have a couple of papers showing that, it's meant to ask, particular algorithm in recommender system, not all of them, but the most widely used one, collaborative filter, for example, push people to same things. So individually you discover more, but like at the aggregate level, you're pushed to the same thing. But generative AI is even way more complex and we don't understand. So if you think about another one that's mind-blowing, which I talked about in class that I teach, is a dating app. I think of a dating app. Dating app, they train their own model, a lot of it based on these either collaborative filter or deep learning models or content-based or network-based, whatever, some combinations of it. But if you think about how exactly that worked, it's the starting data set in combination with the algorithm giving a rise to the recommendation. Then it's a self-feeding mechanism. So it's like the initial state and the algorithm has a huge say in what's happening, what you're, recommended, and your choice. So choice is an illusion in this case. So then what happens? What's the equilibrium there? So again, going back to the study we were doing, it's unclear long-term what will happen because the motivation of the programmers are gone because they were going crazy over badges and reputation, right? And so they were sharing publicly their information and know-how and knowledge. Now it's just a lot of them don't have this, and we find that like many people drop out, right? And then the quality goes down. Same thing will happen. I guess not. It won't happen to everything, but a lot of things, similar, instances would happen in different cases. So I think we need to think about how to solve this problem too.
And not to mention that people are now relying on these tools increasingly to produce content online. So not only are people asking fewer questions, but the people who are answering questions are relying on the tool to craft their answers. And so it's actually going to be unintentionally training on its own data, potentially, which is not necessarily a good thing. The dynamics can be quite bad. And I think actually whole markets could just go away. Like if you think about the market for children's books, like one thing I do with my kid now, I can just be sitting in bed at night and be like, what do you want to read a story about? And I can just ask this thing. Like
Nice.
right now with multimodal, you can make pictures to go with it in the moment. It's the kid's idea. And so like now is there a market for children's authors, right? Like, so you can think about like really, really dynamic personalized content in information goods and how disruptive that's going to be.
And it may prevent the next Dr. Seuss from coming out.
Yeah, I'm not saying this is a good thing.
Yeah,
But to that point, and that's what I think a lot of the writers would say is that regression of the mean. And they're dumbing everything down to the average, cumulative average of the internet as it is today without any, sort of spikes in creativity and innovation.
It's a complementer and a substitute, right? Technology is always both. It depends on the context. So yes, it will totally substitute and just automate some tasks, but other things, it complements what you do and makes you more powerful or more better. It helps you focus your attention on the creative component and less on the quality of your writing, maybe. Right? So I don't think it's as clear cut as that. It really depends on the setting. I think the main moral of the story from my perspective is we literally have no idea what it's going to be like in 1 year.
That's true. I agree with that. It will be very context dependent. I have a paper that's recent that we just uploaded. Then maybe I can talk about that.
I'd love to pivot to what is the current state of research in this space and where are you guys going with your own research?
And so just to talk about, you said creativity. And so we just uploaded a new paper. My student, Eric Zoe, and I uploaded a paper. You can find this at plugging the papers, tiny.cc/genart, GENART. So tiny.cc/genart. And I'll take you to the paper we uploaded a couple of days ago. And this is titled Generative AI, Human Creativity and Art. So we collected data from art sharing site, and so people just sharing art online, and we find that we also build our custom multimodal sort of detector, which is hard. That took like several months, and what we do is we track those people who adapt text to image model like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and things like that, and we see what happens to their productivity, creativity, and who wins, who loses. So co-creation, what happens to their creativity. So, first of all, I think this is the easy part is like, I would like to say first punch is like the first thing. Productivity increases, obviously. There are a gazillion papers showing this, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? Productivity will increase. So about 25%, it goes up to 100%, down to 50, and then it stables up to 25%.
Sorry, how do you define productivity in this space?
So the number of artwork posted on the site. Yeah, great question. And then creativity, as we operationalize using philosophy of creativity, which is like there are two parts: novelty, how different is it from existing artifacts, and then the value, which is context dependent. In this case, value is given to us. Usually that's the hardest problem, but in this website, there is a value. People give, hey, I like this, given view. I've seen this, I either like it or don't like it. And we can track that as a value. And we see that, again, value increases. But what's interesting is the novelty, the space at which we find that we also divide we operationalize two different types of novelty. One is content novelty, actually like what object is in there and the relationship between the focal object and what's actually there in the content, right? Then we have we also operationalize visual novelty, which is at the stylistic pixel level novelty. So we use different models to extract this out. What we find is that content novelty actually average content novelty decreases as an adoption. Basically, people are producing same type of stuff, right? But the max content novelty also increases. So its universe is expanding. What's happening is like few people or some people are, or we're still trying to see what's actually happening right there. But the max universe of content creativity is increasing as a result of adoption of text to image model, which is probably because now people can make it mechanically draw it without any issue. But the average one is going down. So people are producing same kind of content over and over again. Visual novelty, both of them go down, the max and average, right? And what we also find is that, long story short, like content is king. In the land of Midjourney, content is king. People with the good content novelty translates to value. So it's in this case, we just, it's what happens when people co-create with the tools, impact on creativity, productivity, and who wins, who loses, and things like that. So
Fascinating.
That's one aspect, art.
Gordon, anything new?
Just quickly on that one, if you don't mind if you stay with it. Did you do any segmenting, or based on your last sentence, I would imagine though that people who were content novelists, really good at creating valuable content, did they get better or worse? And the people who were making junk to start, did they get better or worse?
Well, it's we literally have that. You should read our paper. I don't want to hog all the time, so go read the paper. So we literally quartile it out, and then previous their content ability, novel ability, visual novel ability, when they win, when they don't. That's totally
Challenge just a week ago about this very subject. One artist.
Oh, okay. So you can see, yeah. So I don't want to hog the time. So
No, please. That's what we're here for. Gordon, anything new on the research front?
Yeah. So, I think one thing I want to say that it's sort of a objective that hasn't been realized yet, which I think is probably relevant to everybody in the room, is educational applications of these technologies. I think everybody knows that these things are extremely impactful. And at the moment, it's sort of students are left to their own devices. And maybe we're trying to figure out at least what the general policy should be, but we have to really figure out what's the appropriate way to use these tools to facilitate learning. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have examples of, if I give somebody GPS, gray matter actually shrinks in their brain and they lose spatial awareness of their surroundings. I still don't know my way around Brookline and I've lived there for 2 years. Right.
Why?
There's no grid. There's no grid that doesn't help, but so the point is you lack something in skill development when you can rely on a tool to automate stuff, right? It's like we teach you addition and subtraction and multiplication before we give you a calculator. So we kind of have to figure out that MO, how we're going to go about that. And, appropriate ways to deploy this in educational context is a huge area of untapped research that I know a lot of people are studying it. It's Ethan Mollick's focal thing right now as well, right? There's a lot to be done there. In terms of other stuff that I have going on in this space. So one thing that we're really worried about that we haven't really talked about much yet is misinformation, disinformation, potential of generative technologies. When it becomes relatively costless to make something that is, content that is indistinguishable from real content, if we're talking about not just text, but audio and video and image, obviously that becomes a risk when you start thinking about disinformation campaigns in politics, right? Or in a courtroom, what evidence can we trust? Anybody that tells you that we have an AI detector and I can tell you if the text is real or not, it's not capable of doing that. It's certainly not on a case-by-case basis. That's not possible. Even OpenAI has given up its project, I think, of trying to watermark because they haven't been able to figure it out. Maybe they haven't given up, but they haven't been able to figure it out. So that's a huge area of concern, and that's clearly illegal stuff that we don't want going on. There's also a huge gray area in the middle, which is things that businesses could do, which aren't technically illegal, but they're maybe a little unethical. We might want to think about regulating them. So you think about applications that we kind of alluded to a little earlier, hyper-personalized advertising content. If I think about trying to monitor your interactions with ads and designing on-the-fly custom ads for you that you are most likely to click on. Not just modifying objective informational content, but also just the aesthetics of the ads and things where you're actually not getting any objective value or information, but it's still nudging you to do what a company wants. It's not clear that that's wrong. We rely on celebrity endorsers to persuade you, even though they're not necessarily adding any info at the moment. So it's questionable if it's different from that. But we're just trying to highlight that potential and how big can those effects be. So we have a study with one of my former students, Scott Shanke, who's now at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and another co-author at Minnesota, Gautam Ray, where we're looking at voice cloning technologies. Voice data is huge. It's everywhere. Companies are investing in it like crazy now. So financial services providers use it for voice printing customers, right? For login. You have a smart TV from Samsung, you might use voice-based search on the TV. They're capturing your voice data every time you do that, right? You have an Alexa or a Google Assistant or whatever, Siri. All of this are all sources of voice information, and it's usually rich. It's protected under GDPR, right? And there's a reason for that. I can infer a whole lot about you from your voice, your demographics and everything else, right? And so it's super rich data, super sensitive data. It's everywhere. And it's really not that hard to make a clone of somebody's voice now with these technologies. You can kind of do it with a 5-second snippet. It'll be pretty high fidelity. Okay. And so what we do is we kind of want to quantify to what extent can I induce you to engage with me, trust me as a third party you've never met, simply by modulating voice. So we conduct a bunch of controlled experiments in the context of a sort of well-established economic game called the investment game. Basically, the setup is you decide at the outset as a participant, do I want to hand over money to this random person I got partnered with? And there's a risk there. They could just like walk away with it if they wanted to, or they can decide to play and roll some dice. And if the right number comes up, we all make some money. And so it's been shown to be pretty, incentive aligned, and it really elicits people's trustingness. And there's a variant of this game where there's a little sort of cheat talk allowed at the beginning where people could pass messages under a sheet to each other on text, right? People have looked at what's the effect of giving the ability to have cheat talk on people's willingness to trust other parties. So we vary this and we put it online. And we have a text-based version, but then we also add a voice-based version. And the trick here is when people participate, they have to read a consent statement into a 1-800 number at the outset. So we get a voice snippet from them. And we have a couple of conditions where one is the other party you're playing with, they're just affecting a random voice in their communications with you. Another one, they use a clone of your voice. And then we quantify your likelihood of playing with them as a result. And we see about an 8% bump in your willingness to play with the other party when we clone your voice.
Others playing with a clone of yourself.
Yeah, like your probability of trusting the other party, it goes up by 8%. And voice is weird because people generally do not know how they sound. Okay, like even radio announcers and like preachers from the pulpit back in the 60s, people did studies and showed that these are the people most capable of identifying their own voice on a recording, because you usually never hear yourself on a recording, right? You only ever hear your own voice resonating through your own skull, so it sounds different. And that's why it sounds weird when you hear it on a recording. Even preachers and radio hosts, like 2/3 of the time, they get it right. So it's really hard to identify your own voice. And that's when you know you're listening for it. If it comes on you and you're not even expecting it, you're very unlikely to identify your own voice. But you do identify like similar accents, you infer similar demographics, and homophily kicks in and you trust the other party more than you otherwise might. So it's sort of this weird dynamic that's relatively voice specific, but the effects are quite large. And it's really, we're just highlighting kind of a point of concern that this is costless to do in a lot of settings. And it's something that the FTC has recently started paying attention to these types of manipulations, but it's not really clear what to do about it.
Was the celebrity recently who had a advertisement go out with, I think it was his voice, I'm blanking, but there was somebody just in the past 2 weeks that came out on social media and said, that was not me, everybody. And it was somebody that cloned their voice and did a promotion.
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole thing in the music industry already, right? Like there was this example of this...
Chesky and I think, was it?
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, that's who it was.
Tom Hanks, right?
The
That was
voice,
that.
right?
Yeah, I mean, we had these instances like several months ago now of the Weeknd and Drake mashup that a ghostwriter made and used synthetic voices to make it, and it went viral on Spotify. And then music had to ask to have it taken down, even though it wasn't clear that it was illegal. This is, the voice space is obviously its own thing, especially because there's huge investments now going into audio-based advertising. It'll probably be the first context where you get interactive advertisements, where you actually talk to the other party dynamically on the other end, and it's just a synthetic voice that can tell you more about the product. And so voice aesthetics are going to become pretty important, I think.
One thing that's kind of dark is I learned this when I was teaching responsible AI for business analytics. One student mentioned that in the developing country, the scam based on voice cloning is rampant.
Yeah, social engineering.
Yeah, a lot of them even don't know these tools exist. And they suddenly have like a son's voice calling, "Hey, I'm kidnapped."
Sure. Yep.
And then, do something, give me money or something. Yeah.
Grandparent scam, they call it too, right? But we're bringing up interesting risks. I mean, obviously, some people would call it opportunity for marketing. And slight plug, by the way, November 16th, 1:00, we have a digital marketing symposium where we're going to be talking about the impact of generative AI on digital marketing and the marketing space. Plug. But to that point, there's certainly opportunities to enhance corporate value, to enhance productivity of advertising spend, all that, but huge risks that we've identified. And combining that with the topic we started with about the concentration of power, what does this look like in terms of the risks that we're facing societally and implied needs for regulation?
I mean, so that's a really broad
I know.
array,
purposely.
right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think actually life is probably, from a regulatory perspective, is probably a little bit easier and more tractable when it comes to organizations and companies making use of these tools. Like we can impose regulations like audit is required or something about how you're deploying the tools, and we audit their behavior, and you have to comply with that. And you have to disclose to a customer any time that you're deploying these technologies, and we audit that. I think the bigger challenge comes from sort of the long tail use cases with smaller companies or individual actors where it's harder to regulate their behavior because you can't actually necessarily prove that the content was synthetic. So I think that's actually the more challenging space. And I actually don't know that there's good solutions for
The
enforceability is going to be a challenge.
watermarking, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, if I talk to, and like I advise a lot of like companies on, implementation, but the biggest problem they're having is the hallucination, right? So it's guardrailing this, which is the biggest problem. And a lot of companies are not even thinking about and consumer facing apps because, liability. So a lot of the things that are happening just at the employee level or B2B level, where that's more manageable. And another thing is like all these wrapper companies that use API. What happens when the OpenAI just like updates the model, right? It is also like there has been, what's called model drift, where, similar sort of prompting gave a rise to different outcome, right? So it's sometimes very brutal, right? So then it's whatever was working yesterday could just suddenly break the next day, and company have to deal with that. Or it's just so what I think might be that's currently there's a huge demand for that there isn't really, really, really good solution. Of course, there are a lot of companies that try to do this, but there can't be too much guardrailing and what's called red teaming, right? Auditing, and making sure that hallucination is under control, which is hard. It's not solved at all because there are gazillion different sources of hallucination, right? Model training, the data set is not matching. Some particular architecture is learning things differently. Even just the temperature, right, that gives a rise to hallucination. It could be intrinsic, where it's just like it, goes against the trained data set, or extrinsic, it's not verifiable unless you. So much work to be done. One thing I wanted to say is that the large language model, if you go down into it, first of all, we don't understand too much what's going on. Second, the ability it breaks down rather quickly, especially the reasoning ability, or even prompting, for example. So a lot of people probably heard about multi-shot, multi-shot, where you provide a bunch of like question and answer, question, and then it's supposed to do better in context learning, if they call it. But like, there's a paper that showed like if you swap out the labels, right, the question answer, you just swap out the labels, it still works. And what's happening there is just like the set of distribution of words are activating neurons in a certain particular way that you get a good answer out of it, right? So even these little things, or the one that was a few weeks old, is that A is B. And, if there is like a reasoning that A or statement or fact that says A is B, because of the decoder, the way it's working to just memorize the next word, it fails to extract out B is also A. Right, they call that reverse curse. But there are so many of these examples. Yeah.
So it almost sounds like there's perhaps a natural regulator or an economic regulator, certainly for large companies adopting it, from risk aversion to liability to just technical imperfections that still exist. And I wonder if that's enough to slow it down enough to be manageable without regulation. Is it a natural economic governor that's on the phenomenon, or do you think there is?
So can you repeat?
I guess the question is, so what I'm hearing you describe is the natural sort of governor, if you will, or regulator of this based on economic conditions, based on liability, based on risk aversion by large companies to adopt from hallucinations to other issues. Is that enough to really slow us down that we can get a handle on things? Or do we still need firm regulation?
Oh, definitely we need regulation. I was talking with the folks at SEC. They were interested in like how do they come up with like regulation for this, right? Because companies are just using this left and right. And obviously a lot of the companies that try to do this in-house, they will take it from open source. Well, you don't know what's happening in open source. Someone can inject something there.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know. That's a big problem, right? The open source community is not motivated or incentivized to, of course, a lot of them are, but it's not, but red teaming takes a lot of money, right? Like, so guardrailing takes a huge effort. So open source community, they're not all of them are incentivized to do this. So now the people trying to take it and use it might not know the full extent what it's capable, what its behaviors are. That's a big problem. Another big problem is that these keep evolving, and having this, when GDPR or, for example, government agencies are told, reproduce things, like they're gonna, unless they make a effort to save the models in a certain way and have a snapshot all the time, you can't do anything, right? So a lot of research papers that use like GPT 3.5, GPT 3, they're not reproducible. But like, when suddenly OpenAI just say, API is gone, you can't reproduce it. So there's another problem there. So I think at the very least, government agencies should look into sort of like coming up with particular to do and procedures, like, you have to save the model parameter, every so and often. And here are some, obviously the small companies are not going to be able to do this guardrailing every time when they modify the model. So maybe the agency should come up with, collect, resources together and come up with like this common test framework in CS where you have to pass a bunch of different checkpoints. And then, that should be the way the regulation should go. The companies are busy trying to make things work, right? They're not going to be hiring people to red team things. It's incredibly hard and costly. OpenAI has been doing that a lot, and they do a lot of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there needs to be some discussion of like allowable use cases. I think, at least for the time being. I mean, it seems like the only plausible path at the moment because we know so little about how to regulate the behavior of these models. Like you see, like every day or every week, there's a new jailbreak comes out to make these models tell you how to do whatever you want, even though it's something blatantly illegal and they don't want you to be able to. They can't stop you. Like I think the latest one is if you ask it how to do something in Zulu where it doesn't have enough training data, it'll just answer you. Right. So like there's like people are coming up with different strategies. People are creative, and there's no way to really lock it down and know ahead of time how to constrain the behavior super well. So I feel like it's not very likely to be a fruitful path to try to say like you just have to follow these 10 steps that occur to us that these are a good idea and this will get us what we want. And like, we find out, people can use it this other way that we didn't regulate, and now we're all screwed.
This just reminds me, like a comic I saw is like, there's like a one line, there's like one person there. It's like, all the language models and then, how I can use this for productivity. And then there's another line with like overflowing line. It's like, how do I break it to this stuff?
Yes. Let's take a couple questions. Yeah, so here's a good one. What's your generative AI litmus test? How do you tell who knows what they're talking about and who's using a few borrowed terms to appear informed? Maybe.
Is this like a subtext or subtweet version? Are they questioning our ability? No. I don't know that I have a litmus test. I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand. Like if the question is about how to gauge whether somebody selling a product knows what they're doing.
I think that's the question. Yeah. The marketplace is so huge to the point of the wrapper companies. There's so many, shall I say, snake oil products out there. Maybe that's the question. Or I guess the question could also be inferred as, how do you know if Gen AI is actually working?
Yeah,
it was my question.
Okay.
I get podcasts every day saying how to BCG, how to, incorporate generative AI into your business model today to plan for 5 years. Like some of these things are just unfeasible. So what limits do you have on sort of conversations where you can tell, hey, this is feasible within what we know about generative AI right now, But in this space, we're saying, we're not going to know what it looks like in a year. What are some of those red flags that show you this is someone who's heard a little bit of the conversation? Maybe they've listened to a 20-minute podcast, but like we need to dig deeper into these things. Are there any of those red flags that come to mind?
Yeah, the biggest thing is like people who are always like so excited about all the potentials, but not the limiting factors, or how, like once you start reading the papers, like in the literature, it's clear that it's not capable in a lot of different aspects, right? But people just, like, as you said, like heard blog post. And then one thing that I find is that also there are several people with large followings that people always talk about. Mm-hmm. That basically, if you see what they say, it's clear that they haven't even read the transformer paper, right? Attention is all you need. And they say things that are clearly wrong. So this is what I said. In my class, like, this is why you need to know inner workings, right? Enough to see. The best thing is, like, you have to learn it yourself. There's no easy way around it. I keep saying to my students, there's no easy way around it. You have to actually read and understand the technology. It's not, it'll probably take some time, but it's not like quantum physics, right? It's just, if you know linear algebra and have time, it's something that you can figure out. So I think,
and I would supplement and say, like, feel free to use an LLM to help you understand, actually, because they're pretty useful for that. I think this is what I'm saying about educational use cases. Like, an LLM is like a teacher that you will never get embarrassed by repeatedly asking your question, right? So I think there's huge opportunity there, because it's like one-on-one and you're never going to judge me. And I just tell you to say it a different way until I get it. And yeah, it hallucinates sometimes, but that also means you should only use it in verifiable situations. So you can check if its answer is correct, right? From an outside source. But I think, like, I agree. Getting an understanding of the underlying tech is probably the fastest way to knowing if somebody's blowing smoke.
Thank you.
Yeah. And yeah.
So we just have a few minutes left. I'm going to close by a question to each of you, since we are launching our Generative AI Research Lab / initiative under the Digital Business Institute. Our inaugural fellows are sitting here. We're bringing on a postdoc. Very exciting time. And we're looking for funding, grants to really drive this in a meaningful way. What are you both excited about going forward in terms of research agendas?
It's a little bit dark, as you kind of used the term earlier, but I'm curious to understand, like, all the things that are going to go wrong in organizations. And I mean that from, like, a teaming perspective, interpersonal interaction. Like, I don't think it's going to be good. The upside and silver lining is we can figure out how to manage this properly, right? So it's like, what are the shifts that have to happen in the way of thinking, the processes, and how we organize, and sort of all that stuff. All of it's going to change. So it's exciting on the one hand, but it's also, like, potentially bad if we don't think very hard about it.
Indeed. I think that's unintended consequence of AI has been my research for as long as I did research. And I think you see this history happen over and over again. Like deep learning, right? 2011, ImageNet, people started using it because of it's gotten popular. And then after a few years later, it's like, oh no, we don't know why it's doing certain predictions. We don't know when it works, when it doesn't work. And then thus were born, XAI, explainable AI, interpretable AI was born. Or, there are people doing that, but like massive effort has been just like 2013, 14, when big conferences start looking into this and having their own workshop. Gen AI is even more complex, right? So I think what I'm excited about is that there are multiple fronts where we have to sort of like predict what might happen, what could go wrong, and then be helpful. Like, here's like how you might prevent this. And we're trying to look into that as well. A bunch of different teams, without going into too much detail. And also the co-creation, right? Co-creation, which the line of work, and, how when humans are collaborating with the AI to do something, right? It's not going to replace us yet, obviously. The study showing that a lot of skills will be shuffled, right? Labor econ and IT productivity folks have shown this, but it's a tool that will get us far. And I think knowing this interaction, where the friction lies, is a big, important question. And one thing that's related to this, if I could just talk about, please, to just like, I thought was interesting. It's just like, I'm fascinated by how like the humanity integrate with the Gen AI. And for example, there's some papers showing like, people trust now that they spend obviously less time using, when they're trying to search something, information seek, they did a study. There's 3 papers that show this similar result. They obviously spend less time producing similar results using ChatGPT versus say Google or some Bing or whatever. But the big thing here is that they trust more, even though there is like a hallucination, right? So, which is a big problem there too, right? And this reminds me a paper by this guy Adrian Ward that says basically, I might be butchering the result, but basically, people's inherent sort of self perspective, there how knowledgeable they are. When they were using Google, it increased because now you have access to Google. But now with ChatGPT, it might be even bigger. Like we know less, but we think even smarter. That might be an issue, right? So
I guess a follow-up question to that would be, as we are incorporating generative AI in the classroom, how do we raise students and people in the world to be a little bit skeptical? Because I still struggle with when they're this young and all they've ever known is Google it, right? But they think what they find at first blush is the fact. I mean, we try to say, look at the source, look at how it was created, blah, blah, blah. But like with a generative AI, there really is no source to double check it with. There is no way for them to understand that it was like, what's it based on, right? So how do we help our students parse through?
but there is.
But there is, yeah.
I mean, they have to Google it or Bing it or DuckDuckGo it, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's to me like the bigger part. Like they take it at face value.
Yeah, but that's a problem.
I think the first order thing is actually like take the time to show them it making mistakes.
Yeah.
So like identifying repeatable mistakes that it makes with certain concepts, and then just make clear like looks very convincing, but it's wrong.
Right.
Now have that in the back of your head before you just trust this thing. And try not to use it in situations where you cannot verify what it's saying.
Yeah.
It is so good at hallucination though. Like
It's confidently wrong. Yeah.
It's so good. Like there was I had a paper that I had to read like a book on concept, a philosophical book on concept. And then I asked this bard and then it gave me something that, maybe why did I miss this? Right. And it was so convincing. I looked at the book. There's nothing of that. And it was so convincing. If I hadn't read the book, like I would have been, oh yeah, that's very believable. So it's so good at BSing.
Well, this is a highly energetic conversation. Lots of great content. Unfortunately, we have to bring it to a close, but I think it's been great conversation, some healthy skepticism perhaps, but also hopefully optimism for the future of leveraging humans and taking this technology to new heights and evolving with it. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thanks online. And see you next time.